In January 2022, the Malian government asked the French troops in Mali to withdraw and asked the French ambassador to Mali to leave the country within 72 hours. This was a result of France's continuous interference in the affairs of Mali, which has been ongoing since independence. The incident led to a lot of tension and out of anger. Some French companies operating in Mali decided to destroy houses, cars, and other valuables they couldn't take with them to France. This just shows that France doesn't want Africa to gain anything from its relationship with Africa. The thing is, Mali is just one of the many countries in Africa that France has and has always had its grip on. France had a significant colonial presence in Africa during the 19th and 20th centuries, with colonies in West, Central, and North Africa. Some of the key French colonies in Africa included Algeria, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Chad, Gabon, Cameroon, Mali, Guinea, and Madagascar, just to name a few. France has a long history of involvement in the affairs of its former African colonies, dating back to the colonial era. After World War II and the granting of independence to its African colonies, France maintained close political, economic, and military ties with many of these countries through a system known as France-Afrique. When France retreated from the African continent in the 1950s and 1960s, it left behind active military bases that continued to give it leverage in Africa. Following their independence, 12 African countries signed secret national defense agreements with France. The agreements, which have never been made public, allow France to retain a physical presence in the countries in exchange for defending their national sovereignty. French colonial policies were geared towards exploiting natural resources and suppressing local uprisings, and the legacy of colonialism continues to influence relations between France and its former colonies. Today, many African countries maintain close ties with France, particularly in areas such as security and economic development. Though there has been criticism of France's historical and ongoing exploitation of African resources and labor. If you look at Africa today, you will realize that the former French colonies are the poorest and least developed, despite the fact they have the most natural resources. Why do you think that is? Because France still practices neo-colonialism on them, and almost all their resources are sent back to France, and they are left with nothing. Why France cannot leave Africa? Straight answer: its economy might crumble. Watch on as we tell you the shocking reasons why France desperately needs Africa and might never completely leave Africa. Let's begin with the economic reasons why France can't leave Africa. Economic reasons. France derives major economic benefits from its extensive ties with African countries. Africa represents an important source of raw materials and an expanding market for French goods. France imports significant amounts of oil and gas from producers like Nigeria, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea. Uranium mining in Niger fuels France's nuclear power industry. Other major imports include cocoa from Côte d'Ivoire, cotton from Burkina Faso, and timber from Cameroon and Congo. French companies also have sizable investments in mining, infrastructure, banking, and other sectors across Africa. France exports over $20 billion worth of goods to Africa annually, including vehicles, pharmaceuticals, aircraft, and machinery. The African market supports hundreds of thousands of jobs in France. France also benefits from African remittances and aid programs that recycle funding back to French organizations. Africa represents a growing market for French companies, with many opportunities for investment and trade. French companies have established a strong presence in many African countries, particularly in the energy, mining, and infrastructure sectors. Critics argue France gains even more through neo-colonial economic arrangements skewed to benefit French corporations and disadvantage African development. But France considers its special economic ties as vital to its national interests. They ensure French access to resources, contain Chinese economic influence, and curb migration flows by fostering development. However, France faces growing African demands for more equal partnerships and greater economic sovereignty. Also, a lot of former French colonies still use the CFA francs, which benefits France and gives France the following advantages. 1. Economic control. By tying the CFA franc to the euro and keeping control over the currency supply and foreign exchange reserves of the CFA countries, France maintains a degree of economic influence over these countries. If they switch to their currencies, France would lose this control. 2. Stability. The CFA franc is seen as a relatively stable currency backed by the euro. France argues that this stability benefits the economies of the CFA countries. However, critics say that stability comes at the cost of economic sovereignty. 3. Economic benefits. France gets some economic benefits from the CFA franc arrangement, including access to natural resources in the CFA countries, investment opportunities for French companies, and guaranteed markets for French exports. 4. Political influence. By maintaining economic influence, France also maintains some degree of political leverage and influence over its former colonies. If the CFA countries switched currencies and gained full economic sovereignty, France's political influence would likely wane. 5. Resistance to change. There is institutional inertia and resistance to abandoning a system that has been in place for decades. France argues the CFA franc arrangement has benefits, so why change it? Critics say the benefits mainly accrue to France, not the CFA countries. In summary, France wants its former colonies to retain the CFA franc primarily because it enables France to maintain economic control, stability, and benefits, as well as some degree of political influence. However, critics argue the costs of this arrangement, in terms of lost economic sovereignty, outweigh the perceived benefits for the CFA countries themselves. Political benefits. France has continuously been involved in the political affairs of many African countries because they want to be able to support leaders that will enable and support their mission in Africa. This is why they will quickly send in military support to any country with strong opposition leaders that threaten their place on the continent. France has been accused of interfering in the governance and elections of its former colonies. There are allegations that France supports certain political leaders and parties it views as favorable to its agenda. France often provides diplomatic backing and support for political leaders in its former colonies. This helps strengthen their positions internationally and gives them political legitimacy. Because they have so much power and influence in Africa, French-owned companies and businesses can continue to operate and repatriate the money back to France. Another reason why it will be difficult for France to completely back off from Africa is because it might lead to the death of the French language. France wants to recruit as many African countries as possible to have French as their official language, which will intend to propel the country into a superpower. They know that if they completely leave Africa, many African countries will adopt new official languages, and the French language might be extinct in Africa. Here are some major French companies that are operating in Africa and profiting substantially from Africa's resources. 1. Total. The French oil and gas giant Total has a significant presence in Africa, particularly in North and West Africa. It has major oil and gas operations in countries like Algeria, Nigeria, Angola, and Libya. 2. BNP Paribas. The French banking group BNP Paribas has a large network of banks and operations across Africa, including in South Africa, Morocco, Egypt, and Ivory Coast. It has banking operations, insurance companies, and asset management across the continent. 3. Bouygues. The French construction and telecommunications conglomerate Bouygues has many projects and operations in Africa, particularly in construction. It has built infrastructure projects like highways, buildings, dams, and airports in countries like Ivory Coast, Senegal, Gabon, and Burkina Faso. 4. Orange. The French telecommunications company Orange, formerly France Télécom, has telecom and mobile networks in many African countries including Egypt, Mali, Senegal, Ivory Coast, and Morocco. It has tens of millions of customers across Africa. 5. Bolloré. The French industrial group Bolloré has substantial investments, operations, and logistics businesses across Africa, focused mainly on transportation, logistics, and energy storage. It operates ports, railways, and supply chain networks on the continent. 6. Société Générale. The French banking group Société Générale has banking operations and subsidiaries across Africa, mainly in North and West Africa. It provides retail, corporate, and investment banking services in over 15 African countries. Those are just some of the major French companies operating extensive businesses in Africa and earning substantial profits from African markets and natural resources. Many other smaller French firms also have operations and businesses on the continent. Overall, France's involvement in African affairs has been a complex and controversial issue, with different opinions on the benefits and drawbacks of France's historical and ongoing relationship with its former colonies. It will be extremely difficult for France to leave Africa because if they do, it might crumble their economy and destabilize the country. France is currently one of the richest countries in the world, with one of the largest economies thanks to the immense contributions from Africa. To be fair, France has also contributed to the development of the continent through infrastructural projects, peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, and job creation. However, many critics argue that the support France has given to African countries is nothing compared to what they have taken from Africa. In fact, many argue that it is because of their interference and influence that most of its former colonies are still so poor and backward. Before we go, we would like to know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the presence of France in Africa has done more harm than good? Or you are of the school of thought that France's presence in Africa has done more good for the continent? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching this video. If you did enjoy the video, please do well to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our videos.